This is Professor Geisler at Cosumnes River College, and this is your short video lecture for Section 5.3, Credential Management for CISN 301 using the TestOut Client Pro version 8.0 curriculum. And in this section, we'll talk about Credential Manager and some of the different uh, services and tools that are used to control what a computer can do, and how, when users access the computer via their credentials, that can be limited, affected, um, controlled in that regard as well. So this is something that you and I, as regular users, don't see much. This is something that administrators would use. And so let's talk about some of these Windows features. And again, Microsoft wants you to, know some of these background systems. So we're helping Microsoft out with some of their technology here, but you need to learn why Windows does certain things and when Windows does certain things. And that is what we're going to talk about here. So let's talk about VSM, LSA, Hyper-V, etc. So virtual secure mode basically allows Windows to control what the CPU does, okay, in order to protect the CPU and, of course, everything that rides upon it from malicious attacks. So um, it uses what they're calling virtualization extensions, okay, of the CPU. So basically, it is a barrier for certain malicious processes to be run by the CPU, and thereby potentially hurt your computer. You also have what's called the LSA, or the Local Security Authority, that stores related security data to accounts, including that access token that we've talked about for the domain. Okay. So basically, this is what, when a user authenticates, then creates the structure based upon, again, things like group policy objects, etc., that would allow a user to access other resources within either a domain, or if it's in the local area, then for that computer, for that device. We've talked about Hyper-V before, and that allows us to create VMs. So we're not going to spend a whole lot more time on that one here. And then there is Windows Secure Boot, so that when your computer starts up, um, during that boot process, where we have got all kinds of uh, potential vulnerabilities from uh, boot sector viruses and other kinds of malware that could be side-loaded in other ways. Windows Secure Boot controls that process to make sure that we are in fact starting up with as clean of a machine as possible, so that whatever credentials users then enter wouldn't be captured via keyloggers, for example, that would potentially then be loaded when the computer starts up. So um, what you're seeing here is sadly reality in many places. You should never see this, okay? Um, and the only thing that's odd about the post-it notes here is they all seem to be written on the same day. Usually when you walk up to computer screens, they have, from different days, different size post-it notes, necessarily in different color, ink. But yeah, this is terrible security practice, because this basically means that this user perceives their passwords as obstacles to getting their work done. Okay. Um, and that's not good, because we need to look at our passwords. We, as all users, this is not just administrators, okay, especially administrators, but as all users, we need to look at our passwords as ways to protect the things for which we are responsible. Okay, when somebody gives me a user account, that means that they are making me responsible for certain things that belong to me. And is that could be my local user files, meaning that the parts of my uh, the files that I work with that are solely assigned to me that I don't share to anybody else. Okay. My system settings, my profile settings. Okay. I want those things to be protected. I don't want somebody else to be able to go in and, steal things, or modify them in such a way that malware can be used to steal things, to encrypt things for ransomware attacks, right? So these passwords, I should want to protect those. And apparently, users that do this don't understand that. So part of our job, actually, as IT professionals, is to educate users as to what should be done. And before I move on to the next screen, one more place if you don't see, I mean, not that you ever should, but and thank goodness with single sign-on systems, we've done away with a lot of this, right? With for most of those resources, you sign on once, and then you can get to different applications such as your Canvas and your Los Rios Gmail. You don't have to log in multiple times. You log in once, and it takes you it issues you that token right when you log on centrally. Um, but if a user still does this with the post-it notes, if they're not attached to the bottom of the monitor, check under the keyboard. Okay, that's another location where users popularly quote unquote hide things, and if any crook knows where to look. So let's talk about how to make credential management easier so that we don't look at post-it notes such as that. Well, and an easy way, of course, is for users to be able to type in their username and their password relatively easily. Okay. And notice right here, remember my credentials? That's kind of nice. It could also be kind of bad, but I'm calling it nice because what this kind of system allows you to do is you have a user log in once, and then Windows can remember those credentials so that when the user logs onto Windows, then those credentials can be used to log on to other resources. Okay. Um, and that could be a temporary remembering, maybe for like a 30-day kind of time frame. But again, you are preventing users from having to input additional passwords, and that's almost always a good thing. If nothing else, because if a bootlegger did in fact get onto one of your users' machines, it's oftentimes bad enough for them, to have to give up one password that somebody else finds out. But if there are multiple, you can avoid that by using uh, different kinds of tools that would uh, take that initial authentication that happened when you logged onto your domain account or to your local account, and then allow you to bring with you these credentials that you are then saving within your credential manager. Okay. And so this is where you save authentication information, and you can add a Windows credential right here if you wanted to, a generic credential. And this is where you would manage those. If you were to want to manually control. Now, a lot of us don't ever really look at that screen because in the domain environment, you don't need it because you can get access to most everything else in the domain via the token that you're issued. However, there may be other resources that are not necessarily Microsoft based. Okay, and a lot of resources understand Active Directory, but a lot of them don't. So that's where these credentials may come in handy. Now, you may also have noticed something similar via your browser. So if you're logging on to multiple websites, within your browser, you may have a password manager that you may separately be using, or something that comes with your browser. And that's a similar kind of tool for credential management. And then you can go in and make changes. Now, as I said earlier, sometimes we want to be able to limit uh, credentials, either by time. So, for example, um, uh, in this case, it's not a time issue. In this case, it's a role issue. So that certain things can only be done as an administrator. Okay, so that's a role-based limitation, and you it doesn't just have to be one administrator. Like I said, you can have multiple administrators. You do want to control how many people can do that, but that's how you can limit who can do what. Here is password limitations. So, for example, we save, in this case, with these default settings, the last 24 passwords that somebody has entered, and they cannot be reused, right? So you can't have somebody like, go back A, B, just from one password to another. Trust me, if you allow people to do that from a convenience perspective, they would. Okay, but no, you have people come up with different passwords. It's good practice. Okay, you're making it more difficult for potential hackers. Um, a maximum password age is also a possibility and something else for you to consider right here. Now, other things to think about include things like the minimum password age, where if you give people a chance to change their password right away again, they may just change it 24 times until they can pick the same one they had before. So you can limit how soon somebody can change their password. We do want a minimum password length, and these days 8 is nothing. Okay. Um, a passphrase of maybe 15 to 20 characters may be a whole lot more useful. So take a look at the business requirements for how important your data is and talk about that with the folks who run the business, right? So this is where as IT we support. So these possibilities here that can be applied aren't us to decide. They're for us to implement based upon decisions that are made at the business level by business managers. Password complexity, and then whether or not those passwords should be stored using reversible encryption so that in fact you could get access to a password if you needed to at some point in time. There's also something called account lockout, which if somebody does not, and we've run into this, right, where you typed in the password incorrectly, so many times because you left the caps lock key on, for whatever reason. Maybe your numlock wasn't properly working. But you can have a duration for account lockout. That, frankly, is a very good strategy against some of the malware that just sits out there and just, every once in a while just checks passwords, right? Because malware is patient. And if we're not monitoring our networks, there could be, all kinds of tries against, with different passwords done over time. Computer runs 24/7, right? Even when we're sleeping. So you want to make sure that there is a good lockout duration that is practical so that it doesn't ruin somebody's day even if they do accidentally lock themselves out. But that's effective against a brute force attack. More about that in a security class. Account lockout threshold, 3 is relatively low. On the other hand, somebody would say, well, if you can't get it right after 2 times or the third time, then maybe your account should be locked out. And then, of course, after how much time that account lockout counter should be reset. But yet again, that malware does have time, right? So business decisions that you and I, once again, then implement. So we talked about Credential Manager and how it saves those credentials and makes them available for us as needed to hopefully keep us from having to type in a bunch of different passwords so that we can then, as efficiently as possible, but as protected as possible, get access to different resources, whether or not they are part of our domain. And some of these settings that we talked about, such as account lockout duration, etc., technically are group policy settings. So you can set those domain-wide or even directory-wide, uh, depending on how things are structured. But you can always override if necessary. But again, you will make those decisions alongside and oftentimes in consultation with those business managers. So Which vulnerability is the Windows Defender credential guard designed to protect against? Well, different kinds of malware attacks. Okay. How does Credential Guard work? Well, we want to make sure that we have a just general protection set up, and that we are at the level of group policy objects and policy restrictions, allowing certain actions to be taken and certain others to not. And then, yeah, requirements for implementing. We do want to make sure that we have an administrative account that can set that up with the right group policy objects, and that you have a proper protection for the access to those resources. All right, so much for section 5.3 and more about Active Directory, or as Microsoft calls it these days, Azure Active Directory, in section 5.4.